It's wonderful to be in Egypt. First time I've ever visited the country. Absolutely fantastic place. So the session is around emerging issues. And I thought what I would do is maybe take quite a global view of some of the things that are happening in terms of the global food supply system at the moment, and then hopefully see how that applies to what you're setting out to do here within the organization, but also at a national level as well. It's always important to start off with our global population now sits at 8 billion people, will rise to 9 billion by around 2050. Most of that extra billion people will be on the continent of Africa. And actually, in many other parts of the world, populations are already starting to decline. North America, in Europe. And with that decline in population gives a huge opportunity to the continent of Africa, because you're going to have many more young people actually to do a lot of the food production that the rest of the world will need. Now, I say there are 4 really big things that are changing our world's food supply system. Our changing climate, actually a climate crisis. The amount of wars that are happening in various parts of the world. There is also what's known as deglobalization. And the 4th factor is the remarkably changing geopolitics of the world. I don't have to stand here and tell you about our changing climate. It's happening everywhere across the world. In my institute, we monitor crop failures in many parts of the world. And generally they're caused by too much water or too little water. Often it's about water supply. If that's for me, tell them I'm busy, okay? Also, what we find is there are massive disruptions in global supply chains, and there are multiple factors. But what we see now, where I come from in Europe, often we will see empty shelves on supermarkets, particularly food, because of these disruptions in supply chains. This was one of my predictions. This slide I produced about 6 months ago. This is or was the Prime Minister of Japan. Japan being a G7 country. And what was happening in Japan was shortages of food, particularly rice. Hands up how many people knew there were shortages of rice in Japan? Not many people. G7 economy, short of rice, the price was escalating. So the government had to basically hand out rice that had been stored for 10 years in the country to the population to try to keep them in food. And my prediction was 6 months ago, this would probably bring the fall of the government of Japan. And it did. That Prime Minister is no longer the Prime Minister of Japan because of the rising prices of food. And we think about the prices of food. This is a commodity tracker, the price tracker for the price of wheat globally. And you can see some really big spikes there. The last big spike in the price of wheat was because of the start of the war in Ukraine. Ukraine, a big producer of wheat, Russia, a big producer of wheat. But with the conflict there, it was seen that that was going to drive the prices of commodities. Sorry. Now, I talked about the war in Ukraine, and there is what's called the Global Conflict Tracker. You can go on, and anytime you can see a breakdown of all of the conflicts, the major conflicts that are happening in any part of the world. As of about 2 weeks ago, when I produced this slide, there are 29 major conflicts in the world. 29. That is more than any time since the end of the Second World War. And where there are conflicts, there will obviously be issues about food supply within those regions, but also a lot of those regions are food exporters as well, who struggle to export as much food. So these conflicts are having massive impacts on our global food system as well. Now, in Europe, we have what's called EUDR. Again, show of hands, how many of you have heard of EUDR? No, it's not a big issue to you now, but I will tell you in the future it's going to be. EUDR stands for the European Directive on Deforestation, and it is the most strict regulation anywhere in the world about trying to stop global deforestation. And in Europe, starting from 2026, which is only a few weeks ago, any European country that buys or sells any commodity of those listed is subject to massive penalties. In fact, the penalties can be up to 8% of the annual turnover of a business, the most strict fines in Europe. And this is Europe's way of trying to stop deforestation, global deforestation. And we call these the big five commodities that are linked. But because of the complexities of the global food supply system, even though you might not be involved in the deforestation, you may well be involved in the trading of these. My friend and colleague Awanli, who's from Southeast Asia, EUDR is one of their biggest concerns at the moment. They are worried that they will be trading in things that have been linked to deforestation, will be sold on to Europe, and then their businesses will be subject to these massive, massive fines. Now, just to give you an example of the complexities of EUDR, I call this the soya case study. So a lot of the world's soya is produced in Brazil. A lot of the soya is produced on land which has been deforested. But because of the introduction of EUDR, there has been much more pressure on different countries to increase the amount of soya that they're producing. And now Africa is involved in EUDR because what intelligence in Europe is now picking up is there is now more deforestation going on in Africa to grow soya to replace soya coming from Brazil. And now I know the eyes of Europe are on soya coming from Africa. They're very suspicious of it. Another big change is China. China is the biggest importer of soya. And until recently, all of the soya that they would have imported came from the United States. Well, they've said no more soya from US because of the war, the trade wars between China and the US. And what we believe is China is trying to convince other countries to increase deforestation to produce the soya for them. So it can be very, very complex. So I talked about that trade war between China and the US. This is one of my predictions I got right. I actually produced this slide 2017. During Donald Trump's first term as president, it was very clear he wanted to have a major trade war with China. And now we're seeing some of the consequences of that. Just to give you an example of soya, China, government of China, all their industry do not buy any soya from the United States. What do you think is happening to the soya industry in the US? It's in chaos. Farmers are going bankrupt. They're going out of jobs. Those are the people who voted for Donald Trump, of course. So China is putting huge pressure on Donald Trump through soya. So food can be very political as well. So I think we have all heard about globalization, the importance of deglobalization. But what is very clear now, the world is going through a process of deglobalization, particularly in food. And if I give you an example of that, just last year, the world's biggest exporter of rice is India. But the Indian government said, we're going to stop exporting rice. That had a major shock on the world's food system. And why did the Prime Minister of India say we're going to stop to export rice? Because he had elections coming and he wanted to make sure there was enough rice for everybody in India and the prices of rice were coming down. So rice was a political tool there. So lots of things are happening in the world's food system which affect prices, which affect affordability, affect many, many different things. Oh, thank you, Sam. And also there are some very, very important impacts on the safety and the authenticity of food as well. So I tell you, I come from Europe. And for a long time, Europe has thought to be incredibly food secure. That's not the case anymore. Europe is very, very worried about its future food supply. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples of things that we're worried about. So for 2025, I was asked by a collection of the UK and Europe's largest food industries, retail, manufacturing, asking them to say, what are the things that we should be worried about, not now, but in the next 3, 5, 10 years? Because they weren't really sure. They are so busy fighting all of the issues that are happening. They asked me to do this horizon scanning for them. So I've had quite a number of different workshops, meetings, seminars with the industry, the food industry in the UK and Europe, and I call it the Sinister Seven. I said, these are the 7 things that you should be really worried about. It's a pity, Sam, we don't have time. We could have a quiz to see how many people predict what the 7 are. But those 7 things are, number 1 is fraud. And because a lot of those factors that I was telling you about, those massive changes, tariffs, and also so many different things, the worry is the amount of fraud is increasing dramatically. And just as one example of that, only last week in the UK, we have an anti-fraud police force who said in 2024, they disrupted 5 organized crime gangs in the UK operating in food. Organized crime in the UK just on food. Tariffs, I've said, are one of the biggest issues about fraud as well. I talked about disruptions of supply chains. Now we're finding in Europe, because of the price of food is increasing, because criminals are getting more organized, there is much more theft of food, large-scale theft of food. And in European context, it looks like a lot of that food is being sold or being stolen to sell into the Russian market, because Russia is short of food, particularly high quality food. Also, there are growing concerns about labour. And that is particularly, again, because in the UK and Europe, we have very strict regulations about the use of child labour, about the use of modern day slavery in the food system. Again, if any food coming into the UK or Europe is linked with any form of modern day slavery, companies are subject to huge fines. I talked about EUDR. The last of the 7 sinister things that are happening is cybercrime. And cybercrime is where these criminal gangs are penetrating the IT systems of food companies, either to blackmail them or to steal food from them. So this is what the industries are really worried about in the UK and Europe. They might not be on your radar screen now, but these will be coming your way at some stage. Now, I'm going to give you 2 examples of scandals in Europe that have happened in the last 12 months. The first I call Tomatogate. 1 year ago exactly, there was a report in the BBC that tomato products, tomato purees and pastes that were being imported into Europe and into the UK were coming from China, particularly one region of China, which there are claims that they use a lot of slavery, modern day slavery there. Now, when that news report broke, lots of contracts were cancelled with companies that were implicated in this. And then there was a general declaration that Europe would stop importing tomato paste from China. China is one of the biggest exporters of tomato paste in the world. In 2025, their exports have dropped by 75%. There are 600,000 tons of tomato paste sitting in China with no market to go to. And then always my question, well, if there's 600,000 tons in China, where did Europe suddenly get an additional 600,000 tons from? And actually the answer was they were getting some from Greece and some from Turkey, but they were getting a lot from Africa, which is very interesting because Africa is not a huge producer of tomatoes, but there is a big opportunity there. But now in Europe, there is a big alert for fake tomato products in Europe, adulterated tomato pastes with Sudan dyes in them, because we think there's a huge amount of fraud happening now. A very second recent example is, I talked about the war in Ukraine. One of the objectives of Russia was to destroy the Ukrainian food industry. Ukraine has a population of about 40 million people. It produced enough food for 600 million people. And what Russia is systematically trying to do is to destroy its agriculture and food industry. Now, one of the ways that several governments have said is we will welcome more imports from Ukraine coming into the UK, coming into Europe. The amount of regulatory checks and compliances normally would have been here, have dropped to here. Now in the UK, there is an epidemic, there is massive outbreaks of salmonella poisoning. And guess where the salmonella has been linked to? Eggs from Ukraine, because of a completely different regulatory system. Now, I'm finally going to get round to talk about Africa, okay? Now, this was an article that I wrote, I think about 2 years ago. I called it Out of Africa, the Future of Global Food Security. I was inspired to write this after spending some time with UN agencies, looking at some of the aspects of the African food supply system. Currently, Africa supplies about 4% of all food traded globally, 4% for your whole continent. But It is estimated by 2050 that 4% will go to 25%. You will become one of the most important trading partners in the world in food. I think that is amazing statistic. And then you start to think about, well, why is that the case? And I started to look for some of the reasons for this. Africa, you have 60% of the world's untapped arable land. 60% of all the quality soil sits on your continent. There is rising investment from China, from the United States. There is absolutely a modernization of the food system going on in Africa in terms of industrialization, in terms of really increasing the scale. And there are many, many new partnerships being formed. It's very, very positive. But when I talk to people in the UN about, well, what are the barriers to reaching that 25%? Agricultural productivity is still low here compared to many parts of the world. Obviously, there'll be climatic issues. It is about getting enough finance. It's about building infrastructure and logistics. But the fifth factor that comes up in everybody that I talk to is about regulatory compliance. When I talk to those food industries in the UK and Europe about future sourcing, about resilience, I talk about Africa. The first thing they always said was, we do not think Africa is a good place to trade with because of issues of food safety. Number one. So I think from the context of what we're talking about today, it's of enormous economic importance for the whole continent of Africa. Now, what are the big issues? RASIVs, I think most of you will know RASIVs. It's a European Rapid Alert System. And always in RASIVs, the number one problem is pesticides. And what's very clear is the pesticide problem, it's not getting better, it's getting worse. There are more and more notifications each year. Why are there more notifications? And there's two reasons. One is because of our changing climate, there is seen to be an increased need to control pests using pesticides. But the second reason is better analytical tests, particularly tests that can detect multiple pesticides present in samples. Mycotoxins also factor very, very strong in RASIV notifications. And again, the number of notifications is increasing. It's increasing for exactly the same reasons. Change in agronomic practices, change in climate, but also changes in workflows, in laboratory workflows that can detect mycotoxins, multiple mycotoxins. Those will be your top priorities in terms of trying to get compliance, particularly with EU MRLs, pesticides and mycotoxins. Well, what Sam had asked me to talk about was what are the emerging issues? What are the things that you're talking about now in the UK and Europe, and what are you talking about in the United States? What are the things that are going to come and hit us with? And these I describe as the kind of the hidden chemicals of our modern food supply system. And number one on that list by far are PFAS. PFAS, you're going to hear more and more about. You are going to have to finish your risk assessment. You're going to have to get in place your laboratory tests for PFAS monitoring for sure. After PFAS, then comes heavy metals. And you might say, well, heavy metals aren't new. They've been about for a long time. But what we think is now changing, and this is from a European perspective, and we look at the global patterns of heavy metals, there is more and more demand for lithium. Lithium for batteries for cars. So there is a huge amount of additional mining going on, lithium mining and other rare earths, rare metals. And that new mining is causing a massive amount of pollution, pollution of water, pollution of air, but also pollution of food. And I tell you what Europe will be doing is upscaling the amount of testing, monitoring for heavy metals in areas where there is a lot of lithium mining going on. One of the things my colleagues and I are doing, we're producing a map of where all of the lithium mining is going on in the world. We're looking at food products that are being produced in those particular regions, and we are now producing a risk matrix based on a country basis. Alternaria toxins. Right, hands up who's ever heard of an alternaria toxin? Sam, good, thank you. Now, I put alternaria toxins in here because in Europe, we have quite a lot of working groups. And I certainly hope actually that your organization gets to the point of these working groups. It's about looking about future risks. And one of the future risks, we call it the emerging toxins, was alternaria toxins. And because of the amount of testing that has been done, the data that has been collected, the risk assessments that are being undertaken, it's likely in 2026, alternaria toxins are going to be added to the list of regulated mycotoxins in Europe. And suddenly countries that are exporting food into Europe, you may well find that food will be rejected because of alternaria toxins. Tropium alkaloids is another group of toxins, and this is linked actually to poisonous plants. Because of some complex factors around changes in agricultural practices, changes in climate, changes in use of pesticides, these toxins are becoming more prevalent in our food system. And again, the likelihood is Europe is going to introduce legislation for tropium alkaloids as well. We have already started to do quite a lot of monitoring of toxins from different countries. We had a massive issue actually with tropium alkaloids that poisoned a lot of children in Uganda just a couple of years ago. And again, these are compounds that you have to be thinking now. You have to be doing your own data collection, doing your risk assessments, getting these into your analytical tests to be ready if you want to export more food into Europe. And the very last category are micro and nanoplastics. There is now more scientific reports about micro and nanoplastics in our food, in our water than anything else. Now, the bad news is there is going to be a lot of legislation about micro nanoplastics. The good news is it's going to take probably the next 10 years. It is such a complicated subject. But guess what? We are already starting to develop and design the workflows to measure these micro nanoplastics. Some of the industries that we work with, European industries, are ready trying to understand what is the scale of the problem, how can we start to mitigate against these problems. So these are really, I would call them the big emerging issues that we see in Europe, but will impact you for the food that you produce and want to export from your continent. Now, quite a lot of bad news there, okay? But always the good news is that there are solutions to this. And it is about good science, good technology, and innovation. And when I meet with the food industries, these are the things that we concentrate on. What will be the science, the technology, the innovation will get us past these particular problems? You can only start if you've got good data. Data collection is hugely important. Then you have to analyze that data and then you have to respond to it. One of the big drivers of AFRAF is doing this, but in a harmonized way. Because if you don't do it in a harmonized way, the way you collect, analyze, and interpret your data will be very different from other people. So just to finish off with, I did actually help build one of the first European reference laboratories for food contaminants. And what I realized there was this is something, the UK, we were quite well resourced, but we realized we could not do this alone. We could not do it ourselves. I set out to develop key partnerships with people from industry in particular, partnerships with different regulatory industries. And now, still, the laboratories that I helped build over a long period of time, they have got workflows that can measure, can analyze, can generate data for all of those different types of contaminants that I work with. One of our key partnerships is with Agilent, and we have worked together for many years in designing fit-for-purpose workflows to deal with the complexity of all of the different compounds that you have to measure in different types of foodstuffs. And I know you're going to get some presentations about some of the innovations in workflows with Agilent. Sam had already talked about the importance of capacity building. A good friend of mine actually said about Africa, the last thing you need is somebody to come and tell you you need to build lots of new laboratories, okay? Always it seems to be the solution, build new labs, build new labs. It's not about building new laboratories. It's about building the competence, the ability to do good work within the existing structures. My colleague and friend Owanwe, we are doing a huge amount of work in what we call building the knowledge academy. How do you build that knowledge about young people, young food scientists, young analytical chemists? How can you get people to come into this particular profession, stay in the profession, have a career work plan? Because you can have lots of nice shiny equipment. If you don't have people who can use the shiny equipment, it never works. So capacity building and thinking about people is hugely important. So the real three important things to finish with. The importance of harmonization of food safety standards regulations is immensely important. The strengthening of the regulatory capacity is essential if you really want to drive, excuse me, drive the economy of the country. And it's not just about thinking about what your problems are now. It's about horizon scanning and building for that. Now, it's just my opinion. It's just my opinion. But I think that's exactly. Oh, I've just lost my last slide. Anyway, I think that's exactly what AFRAF is doing. Oh, we're back again. I think that's exactly what AFRAF is doing. I haven't talked to Sam about how long it took to actually get AFRAF established. I can imagine it took a long time. It has been established, and now you're starting to progress as an organization. And there will be lots of obstacles and lots of barriers in your way. But what you're doing is exactly the right thing. So I commend you all, and I commend Sam your leadership. Thank you all very much.
Very much. I know I just wanted to see if there are any questions or any comments after Chris's. Gonna end up being deaf at the end of this. Sorry. Any questions to Professor Elliott? Yes, please.
Thank you so much, sir. It was actually a very brief yet in-depth presentation. So I commend you also for all the knowledge that you gave us. Just maybe at the last slide that you showed harmonization of regulation is a must. Well, in Europe, that's I think that's the best example. But in Africa, in this region, this is very difficult step. This is like in my imagination, it's almost impossible to have like a harmonization. So what's the other solutions, or what's the solution for this? Like this is very difficult to reach it in this region.
Argue because everybody said, well, my method is better than your method. I think the breakthrough will
And perhaps actually I have a question on my own, Chris. I mean, in what you offered, you said that technology and science innovation is part of the solution, but these are costly propositions. How can we handle that in an environment that is so constrained resource-wise? Yeah, that's all.
Yes. Now, you may well think, because I come from Europe, there's no shortage of resource. Okay, that is not true. Budgets year on year get cut. And that's where we really have to start to think in an innovative way. Now, for a lot of what we have been doing is we've been talking about, we call it two-tier testing. Tier one is a rapid test, a rapid screening test, which will give you everything's okay, or you might have a problem. It's like a filter. Those samples that show that they may be breaking regulations, either from a point of MRLs or from adulteration, they go for a more sophisticated analytical test. Now, what is really important, your sampling is very much risk-based. What do you sample for? Where do you take samples for? What do you test them for? This becomes part of your risk matrix. In Europe, going back 20, 30 years, we sampled and tested for everything. That's gone now. It's risk-based sampling, risk-based analysis.
Ecosystem also demands regulatory system. What would be advised for us as regulators how do we encourage our government to actually invest in this from their experience, what advice do you give?
And that's a really good question about, well, often when I talk about food safety, I say the most important aspect of food safety to governments isn't to keep people safe. It's about, can you generate national income? And there's two big calculators there. Is if people get sick, what is the cost to your country? And we calculate the numbers of days people are off sick from work. There's one economic indicator, but the other is the lost opportunity of food exports. If you cannot certify your peanuts, or if you can't certify your rice will reach international standards, you're losing that opportunity to export. So my advice to you is, it's economic calculators. That's what encourages governments. And I will tell you, in the UK, that's exactly what we do. And then we calculate the lost tax revenue to the government. That's the only number that they really care about. How does it impact tax revenue?
Thank you. Thank you for that response. And thank you for taking the time and for those and for guiding us through a number of discussions that we're going to be going through in the upcoming couple of days and beyond. And with that, in Chris's presentation, we heard that pesticide residues is one of the key elements of trade disruptions. And basically, key to that is the ability to test for pesticides and to test for as many pesticides as you can with the lowest investment possible. And I guess to guide us to opportunities of multi-resident testing of pesticides, that we're all at school for handling technologies, guiding us to analytical solution for pesticide residue analysis, classification of counting pesticide residue to the accordance with the human requirements. And actually, I think. Thank you.
Different assignment towards data collection and increase because in your presentation will perfect example to this one. This one is a very complex, a very technical presentation on pesticide workflow. As we have seen previously, workflow is important. So we'll show you an example of workflow. But I will actually take discussion on generic presentation of where the workflow comes from. This morning, I was asked, what do you think as a manufacturer? What do you need from AFRAF? What I told you is, we need you to guide us where you want to go. This is exactly we have seen previously. Side of the agriculture of food days. There's a lot of different pesticides. It's very, there's a lot of different pesticides, a lot of inflammatories, and most of the time the population are very, very good detections. This is the beginning of the talk. What should we learn to look for? What kind of matrix? And what are the we need to achieve? We are using huge amount of pesticides because, as we have seen, we need to feed the population. So we need to have we need so pesticides are one of the be able to control the best and work on production. Depending on the development, South America, over China, over Japan. And this is the reason why we need regulation from Africa, because you can do this method for Africa, but maybe it will be too stringent or not enough. I don't know. But it's what makes it possible. And that way, obviously, it becomes in a shorter amount of time, the most important continent to provide food to the rest of the world. You will have to follow the European regulation. So even for control lab in Africa, maybe we have to follow different regulations depending on your controlling food for Europe or for other parts of the world.
Laurent, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but we seem to be having a problem with that microphone on the Zoom system. So we're going to try to ask you to use the one on the podium, but we have to try it though.
Can you hear?
Africa stands at a pivotal moment. A continent rich in agricultural heritage, dynamic markets, and evolving food systems, now united by a shared ambition to ensure safe, resilient, and innovative food for every African citizen. In 2023, African food regulatory authorities came together in Cairo to make history. The Cairo Declaration established the African Food Regulatory Authorities Forum, AFRAF, a collaborative network to strengthen the continent's food regulatory governance. In December 2025, AFRAF reconvenes, once again in Cairo, on the margins of Food Africa 2025. This second in-person meeting marks a new chapter for food regulatory cooperation across the African continent. Organized by the National Food Safety Authority of Egypt, NFSA, in partnership with the Global Food Regulatory Science Society, G-Force. Over the next 2 days, African food regulators, regional bodies, global partners, and scientific institutions will come together to chart the future of food safety cooperation and innovation in Africa. Day 1 begins with a review of AFRAF's progress since the Cairo Declaration and a focus on enhancing mechanisms of food regulatory cooperation amongst African food regulators. The agenda advances into a critical theme: food monitoring as the foundation of strong food control systems, supporting evidence-based policy aiming for harmonized maximum residue limits and enhanced market access across the continent. On Day 2, the spotlight shifts to regulatory modernization and innovation, exploring how Africa can enable new technologies, strengthen resilience, and revitalize traditional agriculture through science-based and future-ready regulatory frameworks. AFRAF members will also discuss practical pathways to build robust national food safety authorities, mobilize resources, and reinforce partnerships with other regions and global partners. This meeting will lead to a roadmap of food regulatory cooperation amongst African food regulators for 2026 to 2027, empowered through AFRAF's leadership. Together, we are shaping a safer, stronger, and more innovative African food system for today and for generations to come. Africa stands at a pivotal moment. A continent rich in agricultural heritage, dynamic markets, and evolving food systems, now united by a shared ambition to ensure safe, resilient, and innovative food for every African citizen. In 2023, African food regulatory authorities came together in Cairo to make history. The Cairo Declaration established the African Food Regulatory Authorities Forum, AFRAF, a collaborative network to strengthen the continent's food regulatory governance. In December 2025, AFRAF reconvenes, once again in Cairo, on the margins of Food Africa 2025. This second in-person meeting marks a new chapter for food regulatory cooperation across the African continent. Organized by the National Food Safety Authority of Egypt, NFSA, in partnership with the Global Food Regulatory Science Society, G-Force. Over the next 2 days, African food regulators, regional bodies, global partners, and scientific institutions will come together to chart the future of food safety cooperation and innovation in Africa. Day 1 begins with a review of AFRAF's progress since the Cairo Declaration and a focus on enhancing mechanisms.
1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, testing. Yeah, it's back. Okay. So we would be ready, but you can finish your ice cream, and upon finishing the ice cream, we can reconvene. Or we can reconvene if Laurent basically is willing to talk while you're eating your ice cream, we can do that too. Perfect. So let's continue with pesticides. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Did you test if there are some pesticides in your ice cream? That's a good question. So let's continue this presentation. So pesticide, as you can see, means many different things. The site will depend on what you want to kill, the type of locust, the type of fungi that you want to kill, and everything. So by editing the regulation, there's 2 advantages for you. First of all, because we define what has to be controlled, but also you will help the companies that are producing food to know what they can use. Because if they are using a fungicide to kill locusts, it will not work. It will make the food non-compliant, it will make the food dangerous for man, but it will not kill the locust. So it's also important that you discuss all together to build regulation, help the company, to tell the people that are producing food
what they must use, what they can use, what is useful for them. This is also the interest of building a regulation. Samuel asked Professor Elliott, what is the solution to have complex workflow with extremely expensive instruments while the budgets are limited? One of the reasons is science. As you can see here, at the beginning, when we started to study pesticides, we were putting 100 pesticides in a method. Then this number is increasing. It's increasing because of science, because of progress of the instrument, because of the progress we made on the workflow. So now we are able to analyze hundreds of pesticides in one and unique run. What does that mean? I told you that maybe the regulation from Europe, Japan, China, and US is different. But if you have a method that covers all the pesticides of all the different regulations, you don't have to have several instruments depending on the regulation. If you can have a workflow that is covering everything, then you can, with one instrument, with one method, cover everything and just have a different data row processing to avoid losing time. This is where science will help you. And this is where the company like Agilent can help you. There are a lot of different metrics. We discussed also about the sample preparation. Sample preparation is key. You will not have the same sample preparation for any matrix. Each matrix has its own specificities, and each matrix will need a specific preparation. On this workflow, we are talking about only one type of molecule, which sorry, I use high water content foodstuff. So this workflow has been developed for high water foodstuffs. If you are using spice, there will be a different sample prep. The workflow on the instrument part will be pretty similar, but the sample prep is different. This is also something that is really important to understand. This is what we need. When I told you this morning that I need you to discuss about regulation, it's because we need this kind of table. With the workflow with you. What are you looking for in one matrix? At what sensitivity? What type of recovery do you need? What type of accuracy do you need? What type of precision do you need? Then when we have this information, we can work on the workflow. And with this presentation, I will show you some type of test we made to be in agreement with this regulation. This document is a European regulation, which is based on Santé guidelines, which are used all across Europe. What does that mean? That means that if you are in France, in UK, in Poland, the methods are nearly the same because they have to comply to the same regulation. So anywhere in Europe, whatever type of instrument you have, we are following the same guideline. So we are using similar methods. On this presentation, I will show you the type of linearity, sensitivity, recovery, and precision and accuracy that you can have with pesticide analysis on LC and GC triple pods. As I told you, sample prep is key. When we are providing a workflow, we are also providing help on the sample prep. The interest of this method and this workflow that I will present to you is that we are combining LC and GC method in the same workflow. So that means that you have to do only one sample prep for LC and GC. And why is it important to have LC and GC when you are doing pesticide analysis? As you have seen, the type of pesticide that exists are really different. Some of them are GC amenable, some of them are LC amenable. You can do a pesticide analysis with only LC or only GC, or you will need some compounds. You need both instruments. But at least here, you will do only one sample prep and you will inject in both instruments. So you will reduce the cost of your analysis. This is how the science again can help you to reduce the cost. This is a very simple type of sample prep. Some are more automatized, but are with most costly instruments. So it's always a balance between the cost and the automatization and the time you will need to make the sample prep. We are using what we call creatures. choose the manual type of manual extraction so that we get rid of the matrix interference and we collect at the end a liquid that will be injected in the system to detect the pesticides. So this is the type of sample prep we are doing. And at the end, we split the sample in two parts. One will be injected directly in the LC and one will be injected in the GC after dilution. As you can see here, after any type of sample prep, you need to check if you have any issue. For example, typically when we are doing this type of sample prep, we are adding a cleanup step. But when we made some experiments, we discovered that if you compare the results without cleaning on the right and with cleaning on the left, without cleaning on the left and with cleaning on the right, sometimes the signal disappears. Because for this type of matrix, for this type of expression, we discovered that the cleaning step was not necessary, and by the way, can lead to some compound disappearing into the results. So we remove the sample prep, which is commonly used. Other examples. So this is very important when we build a workflow. We always check every step by step, to check if it has a positive or a negative impact. Most of the time, there are, for some compound, positive impact, for some other, negative impact. So it's always a balance that we will evaluate. Of course, how do we evaluate the balance? We look at the more sensitive compound, and we will put the balance to the more sensitive. A compound that is very easy to detect, we don't care if we lose 50% of the signal. But a compound that is extremely difficult to detect, this one, we want to be sure that it will be at 100% of the extraction. It's always a balance. So at the end, as told you, we decided to remove the cleaning step. So this is the final step we made. So extraction with pressure and acetone trial, then centrifuge. We inject in the GC with 1 to 5 dilution, and we inject directly to the LC. Both systems are triple quads. In the instrumentation bar, we have different types of systems. Here we are using triple quad because the triple quad is the more sensitive system when we are dealing with very heavy matrix. If you're looking for drinking water, you don't have any matrix interference, you can do it with a single quad. When you are dealing with complex matrix like food, you need the state-of-the-art instrument. And that's the reason why we are using triple quad in both cases. This is the type of method we are using. When we're talking about a workflow in Agilent, as I told you, it means a complete solution. This is what we call a complete solution. We will introduce you to the sample prep workflow. We will give you a full method. We don't provide only the instrument, we provide the method. So all the method parameters, the specific features that we are using to improve the results, and everything is installed in the system so that you just have to run your sample and to analyze the pesticide without needing additional development. But for this, once again, it can be done only if we know what we need to achieve in terms of limit of detection and the list of compounds we need to have. If we don't have such a regulation, we can't provide a workflow because we don't know where we have to go. But this is just the beginning. Something that is really important also is what will happen once you have the system. So support is also important. And this is also something that is really important for Agilent. This is the reason why we have distributors all over Africa. For example, in Egypt, here, our official distributor is Technoscience, but we have the distributor in our country of Agilent. This is the reason why I am here. I am a specialist in GCMS. My role is to support all our distributors when you are talking about GCMS. What means supporting the distributor? It means helping them in developing new methods, helping them to choose the right instrument and the right workflow for our customers, helping you when you have the system and you need to develop a new method. This is what we call support. This is also the pure support on the instrumental part. This is the reason why Mohamed Suleiman is here. Mohamed is a service manager for all Africa. He's also helping the distributor when you have an issue on the instrument. It's the second level of support for the instrument. Our distributors are all trained on the workflow and it is done by Agilent. When I mean trained, it means we want them to have the exact same level of knowledge than pure Agilent people. And when we don't have the knowledge, so we are also trained on the workflow. We can help you to install this type of workflow in your labs. So this is the method that you have on the triple quad. This strength graph here is showing the number of compounds we are analyzing at any time of a runtime. So you can see here that we have a runtime of 20 minutes, and we have 300 compounds analyzed in 20 minutes. This is also where the method has been developed around the time. I told you from the beginning, we started with several hundred of pesticides, but at the beginning, it was 40 minutes runtime. So as you see, science is improving to help you to have more efficient method in a shorter amount of time with a lower sensitivity as possible and complying to the most regulation as possible. This is where the science will help you. We have the same type of method for the LC, and in total, with this workflow, we are analyzing 300 compounds by GCMS, 700 by LCMS, so 1,000 and detection in the system. With all the instrumental parts developed and installed in your lab. This is the method for the LC, as well as you've seen the method for the GC. This is the method we have for the LC. With once again, a short runtime of 25 minutes. So you have two runtimes of 25 minutes to analyze 1,000 pesticides with one new one sample prep. This is the same representation for the LC. So here you can see that there's a lot of compounds. The most important number of compounds are from 10 and 20 minutes, but in total you have 700 pesticides analyzed in one runtime of 25 minutes. This is the type of overview we can see. You will have a lot of leaks, and this is where something that is also extremely important will occur: software. Analyzing is one thing, but some studies that have been made by the European Union, the cost, the human cost of one analysis is 75% of the cost for you for each sample. So the most important cost is human cost. So spending time to reprocess the data is key for you in terms of sample quality and also of cost. That's the reason why we developed also some specific tools on the software to help you to quickly reprocess the data and to quickly see what compounds are compliant and what compounds are non-compliant. And we already discussed about compliance during previous presentation. Compliance is key. Key to be sure that what you detect is what is in the sample, but this is not what European is expecting. Expecting you to say yes, and this is the proof that we have analyzed them and that the method you have used is correct. And this is where the compliance will be very important for you. If you follow the compliance rules, you will have better chance to penetrate other markets than only the markets of your country. If you want to export, you need to be compliant. So you will also need to be sure that you are following the compliance, and for this also we have a lot of tools, a lot of software helps to help you to have full traceability and full compliance in your analysis. So this is the part of the validation. When we are developing a workflow, I told you we are testing every step. We have seen that we are testing the step on the sample prep. but then we are validating the method to check the compliance, if you can follow all the compliance norms and all what is required by the santé regulation. Here, what we are evaluating is the matrix effect. I told you previously that in one of the difficulties of pesticide analysis is the fact that you have different matrices. And pesticides is the most common application, but it's one of the most complicated applications in food control. There's a lot of very small details that will have a huge impact on your analysis. For example, what we call matrix effect. What we call matrix effect is what you can see here. Depending on if you're injecting in a pure standard or with a matrix, the result you will have is completely different. You can see on the left that when you're injecting the compound in the matrix, you have the orange peak, which is really huge. If you're injecting in a pure standard, you see no peaks. This is something that is really typical from pesticides. That's the reason why we always recommend you to do what we call matrix match calibration. It means that instead of injecting your calibration curve into a solvent, you take a blank sample, you spike the sample, and you use it for the calibration. You see here the difference in terms of intensity. That also means that depending on the type of matrix you will have, you may have some different answers, so different quantification. And if you have a quantification that depends on the matrix, it means that the compound that was compliant can be measured as non-compliant or the opposite. So this is also something you must take into account. And for this, we also have developed in the workflow some methods to avoid this kind of misinterpretation. For this one, we use matrix match effect, but we have other type of solution, like using what we call analyte protectant that will match like a matrix and will help you to have compliant results. We are also looking at the linearity. Why linearity is important? Because if you are linear, your quantification will be more accurate. So for any kind of workflow, we are always setting the linearity of each compound, and we check that this linearity is compliant with the santé regulation, because santé regulation gives some specific recommendation about the linearity. In blue, you have the results for LC, and in yellow for GC. As you can see, both instruments are working very well with very linear and accurate results. This is also something very important, sensitivity, because in the santé regulation, the point is not to detect the pesticides, it's to detect and quantify the pesticide and to check if this pesticide is above 10 ppb. If you find the compound lower than 10 ppb, the sample is compliant. If it's above 10 ppb, the compound is non-compliant. If you want to be precise at 10 ppb, you must be able to detect it at least 3 times lower, so at 3 ppb. As you can see here, with this workflow, sample prep include, you can detect most of the pesticide at sub ppb level. So we are extremely sensitive, so we have no issue with these parameters. And this is something really important. And this is also where we need regulation, because for each type of instrument, we have different level of sensitivity. If we don't know by the regulation what level of sensitivity you need to achieve, we can't help you to select the right instrument. We have 3 levels of sensitivity, depending on the instrument you will select. For pesticide, we are always using the most sensitive instrument, because we need to reach very, very low ppb sensitivity. This is the criteria here that the santé regulation recommends so that a method is compliant. You need to have all these criteria fulfilled for all the compounds. This is what we have checked. So we have right signal to noise at 10 ppb. We have a perfect accuracy of qualifier ratio. We have a good linearity, good recovery, and good repeatability. If you can fulfill all these criteria, your method can be validated according to santé regulation. If you can prove, thanks to the compliance, that you have followed this regulation, you can then export to Europe. So it's very important that you follow all these criteria. And this is the end of this presentation. I thank you for your attention, and if you have any question, please don't hesitate to ask me or to contact us directly.
Laurent. Thank you very much, Laurent. And I know that the presentation was quite technical, and not everybody of us actually is working in laboratories, but
sensitivity, because it's really important to the results. But then there's one completely different question I want to ask. As regulators, we are faced with a new problem in the sub-Saharan Africa. Recently, we found pesticides in fish, small dried fish, processed fish. Actually, people were using pesticides to preserve them from these insects. So I don't know how that can be incorporated into this pesticide testing, because we don't have maximum limits for that. So it's a challenge for us. We still need to protect the consumer from those pesticide effects.
Thank you for this question. This is something that is really, I would say, pretty common. As we have seen, we start from 100, now we have 1,000 pesticides in the same workflow. So we are always improving, including new compounds. What is the process for that? First of all, we need to know that there's a new pesticide to find it. So then we need the pesticide, we will test it, and we will directly incorporate the pesticide in the existing workflow. Will it work? Yes or no? If yes, and also the method is developed. If no, we will modify the workflow at certain steps to be sure that the compound will be possible to include it in the workflow. Then comes the second step. We will evaluate the sensitivity. Exactly the same type of experiment I showed you. We will calculate the limit of detection. We will check that it is linear. We will check that it is repeatable. And once all these parameters are achieved, we can consider that the method is compliant for the new pesticide. Then comes the second step. What sensitivity should be validated? And this is where the regulatory authorities will have an influence. We can decide on that. We can only tell you we can detect this pesticide with workflow at this level of detection. Do you think it is enough to protect the population? Yes or no? If the answer is yes, then it's up to you to decide what will be the level where you will declare the sample non-compliant. If the answer is no, we will try to develop a new method or a new instrument that is more sensitive to detect this compound. This is, for example, what has happened with glyphosate and AMPA. There's a unique method for these compounds because they are so specific that to achieve the required limit of detection, we need to develop a method specific to this compound. That happens sometimes. First time we try to improve to implement the existing method. If it's not enough, we will develop a new method, which can take time.
thank you. And I think actually perhaps maybe the corollary to that answer is that I think we need more probably discussion and dialogue about methodology requirements, needs that are expressed by African authorities, such that actually we offer solutions or discussions to address those needs. And one of the things that we'll be potentially discussing as a next step is the organization of thematic webinars for which pesticide residues can be the key element, whether it be for the analysis, for the risk assessment, and for aspects of risk management. Thank you very much, Laurent, for that. And we'll see you actually in the future around the organization. And in fact, to give you a segue to the... Sure. So to give me a segue to the presentation. Parfait. To discuss about risk management related to pesticides. And we know that in a lot of instances, products can be caught at the border simply because the jurisdiction from which the product was shipped has a maximum residue limit. The jurisdiction where the product is imported doesn't have one because the product is not registered. What do we do then? And this is essentially a proposal for the possible consideration of the development of import MRLs without requiring the registration of pesticides. And for that, I'm going to call on my colleague, Dr. Mustafa Sultan, who's going to be sharing the approach with you, which could be, in fact, an area that we can invest some time and effort towards as part of the continent activity.
Good afternoon, everyone. So it's a privilege to join you at the second meeting for the African Food Regulatory Authority Forum, AFRAF, in Cairo. This presentation explores a scientific and regulatory pathway toward harmonizing of import maximum residue limits, or MRLs, for pesticide residues across the African region, and how import MRLs can serve as a facilitator to trade of agriculture products. The aim is clear: to protect consumers while facilitating fair and efficient trade. Pesticide residues are at the heart of food regulatory decision-making. They are more than laboratory outputs. They influence market access, consumer trust, and public health policy. Differences in MRLs between countries, or even the absence of an MRL, can become an unintentional barrier to trade. Sometimes a pesticide used safely in one country may not be registered in another. When that happens, shipments can be detained or rejected, even if the food poses no health risk. Codex relies on the work of the joint FAO-WHO meeting on pesticide residues, GMBR, which is an expert body that assesses residues based on toxicological and agriculture data. GMBR evaluates both acute and chronic exposure compared to health-based guidance values, such as acceptable daily intake, which is the ADI, the amount that can be safely consumed daily over a lifetime. Those guidelines also accounts for results related to patterns of use, fate of residues, analytical methods, etc. But what happens when there is no Codex MRL and no national standard in place, or even when a national MRL exists, but enforcing it may compromise food safety considerations? This is exactly where the concept on import MRL becomes essential. Now imagine this scenario. A food shipment arrives at the border, a pesticide residue is detected, but there is no local MRL, and Codex has not established one either. This creates a regulatory vacuum. The product is detained, and the competent authority has no clear benchmark for action. In such cases, an import MRL, or import tolerance, provides a practical, science-based solution. Before moving forward, it's important to define the term import MRL. An import MRL is MRL set only for imported products, designed to meet trade and food security needs when neither national nor Codex limits exist, but national food safety standards is achieved. The mechanism can also apply in cases where a food security concern arises, even when an MRL exists, the product is of high economic value, or the pesticide is authorized in one abroad in other country, but not domestically registered. Import MRLs ensure the safety assessments remain consistent while allowing trade to continue without compromising consumer protection. To make such a decision consistently, a structured process or a decision tree is needed. The decision tree offers a transparent framework for evaluating import MRL requests. Let's move through it step by step. So the first step Okay. The first step when an MRL is detected in a shipment, the first question to ask is, does this MRL complies with the exported country requirements? If no, then we reject the product. But if yes, then we go for the next step. Has this MRL been set according to acceptable practices and based on risk analysis and scientifically justified? If no, then we can reject the product. But if yes, and it's the exported country or the industry can justify the registration in the exported country, then we conduct a national risk assessment. And here we should emphasize on the need to have a reliable databases for both consumption and occurrence. Without these kind of data, risk assessment will not be realistic and well justified. The next step, we calculate and compare the exposure assessment with the health risk guidance values. If the decision came out that the product poses risk, then we reject the product. But if the decision came out as a safe for national consumption, then we can adopt a risk management approach for that. This system allows regulators to make defensible, evidence-based decisions while supporting trade continuity. If the risk assessment shows no appreciable health risk, the next step to define a proportionate and transparent risk management strategy. 3 risk management options can be proposed. First, to authorize a one-time release of the detained consignment based on the documented risk assessment results. This would prevent unnecessary food waste and disruption to the supply chain while keeping full traceability records. Second, to review the existing MRL for the imported products and consider alignment with internationally recognized standards with levels supported by established risk assessment and good agriculture practices. Third, to develop a structured framework for evaluating and adopting import MRLs when justified by science and of course by the good agriculture practices. This framework would ensure that future decisions follows a predictable, data-driven process. Together, these measures protect consumers, maintain public health confidence, and minimize unnecessary trade disruption. With this framework in mind, the next step is to explore how a practical import MRL list could be established. A dedicated import MRL will transform case-by-case decision-making into a proactive, coordinated approach. Such lists could be built by combining historical compliance data, and here again, I would like to emphasize on the importance of monitoring data, systematic reviews for partner practices, and industry-submitted justification supported by data from that decision tree. It's essential to clearly separate pesticide registration, which involves domestic use, from import MRL, which only applies for imported goods. This structured approach would allow competent authorities to review and update MRLs periodically using real trade and laboratory data. The result is a living system that ensures fairness, predictability, and transparency, attributes critical for both industry and regulators. This approach highlights an important distinction in regulatory science. First, regulatory non-compliance doesn't automatically equate to health risk. Second, this reinforces why scientific justification must guide MRL setting rather than relying purely on administrative or legacy limits. Third, a structured import tolerance mechanism helps to bridge these gaps. It allows authorities to evaluate whether residues detected, although not aligned with domestic MRLs, remain within a safe exposure range based on toxicological data. Based on toxicological data, dietary intake models, and international standards. Ultimately, Adopting a data-driven decision-making framework strengthen both consumer protection and market opportunity, ensuring food safety without unnecessary trade disruption. Let's always remember that science-based policy making is the bridge between safety and market continuity, not a choice between them. To sustain such a science-driven system, institutional capacity and cooperation are essential. No single country can develop all the required data alone. Our region shares common consumption habits, agriculture practices, and climate conditions, making cooperation both logical and efficient. By sharing exposure and consumption data, residue monitoring results, and analytical databases, countries can create a joint foundation for harmonized import MRLs. Such collaboration would not only support trade among African states, but also enhance our collective position in global codex discussions. Ultimately, these efforts lead to stronger, more resilient food safety systems. To close, I would like to highlight 3 practical questions for further discussions. These are meant to guide next steps and help us to identify what's feasible in the short and medium term. First, how many jurisdictions have already embarked on import MRL approach? Understanding who has implemented this approach and how they structured their process. This will help us benchmark options and avoid reinventing the wheel. Second, how can we develop an import MRL approach that fits Africa? The focus is on designing something scientifically robust, but realistic for our context. Considering capacity, data availability, trade patterns, and the need to protect consumers while facilitating access to safe and agriculture inputs. The third question is, can this approach be implemented regionally or sub-regionally through RECs? A regional approach could reduce duplication, support harmonization, and lower costs for both regulators and industry, while still allowing countries to address specific national concerns. These questions are essentially about learning from global experience, designing for African realities, and exploring regional solutions that can scale. In conclusion, harmonizing import maximum residue limits is not a scientific necessity, but also a policy opportunity. It allows our region to ensure consumer protection while promoting predictable, fair trade. With that, I would like to thank you for your attention. Thank you.
This one.
Mustafa, for the overview, and allow me actually to ask a question. Amongst the African jurisdictions, how many African jurisdictions present here? Yes, it's working. Yeah, I think it's working, right? Yeah, that seems to be. How many African jurisdictions have developed import MRLs so far? No. Okay. Steve has a question. I'm going to give you the floor, Steve, and then.
It's not a question of confirmation for, I mean, the critical nature of this AFRAF platform. For us, it's like we are just beginning to think about this. And I think it's very essential that we actually get this done. Currently, we have what an agile equipment to see very focusing pesticide residue. I think we're very necessary to set up this system. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Any other comments or questions on this topic? Yes.
So much. Thank you for the presentation. Actually, it's very complete and it's very appealing. can see a number of obstacles to implement, especially in regional from our communities. And excuse my ignorance, but this is what you expect when you just when you telling this idea to the national food safety implementing body, So as you explained in the decision tree, and you say this still has it doesn't have an MRL locally, regionally, or internationally, and if it's not so, it goes to the no. So when you implement your idea and it goes to the yes, and this goes to the SAM question regarding finance. So it's easier to just say no and just send it back. So who's going to finance the other way, going down to the decision tree? And it's very logical. I can see it's easier the other way.
John, okay. I can actually answer your question by saying that, in fact, the decision to say no to the shipment may be more onerous than the opposite.
Absolutely.
Particularly when the shipment represents a concern from the food security standpoint. When you have tons of products sitting at a port or at a point of entry, and you have a non-compliance, and that shipment is critical for your supply chain, I think actually disposing or saying no to that shipment is more problematic than otherwise. And that's why, and I'm not saying all the shipments will be in that situation, but one of them will be at some point. And that's why you need to have that approach. And in fact, sharing with you this approach came from an experience that was lived in other parts of the world. And this is, in fact, where I see the parallel with Africa. The Asia-Pacific region, the Asia-Pacific region, APEC. APEC are countries as diverse as the United States, Canada, Chile is an APEC country, China is an APEC country, Samoa or Fiji is an APEC country. So that gives you the diversity. Because you have such a diversity, you cannot have the same pesticides. For a country that has a climatic condition that is cold, like I wouldn't express, such as the one I come from, versus a country like Fiji or a country like Indonesia, for example, where you have tropical conditions, you have two different types of pesticides. So you cannot have harmonization of MRLs on the basis of registration of pesticides. Why would I register in Canada a pesticide that my farmers will not use? Because my farmers are not in a tropical condition. They will not use that pesticide. So why should I register it? Registering a pesticide costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to do that. However, because the pesticide is not registered in Canada, does that give me, as a Canadian regulator, the right to reject a shipment coming from Indonesia, where Indonesian farmers have relied on a pesticide that was assessed and that was used in accordance with good agricultural practice? And the answer, no, I should not be denying that. Now, you're going to tell me, but Codex is there. And I would say, yes, that would be great if Codex has already an MRL for every single pesticide that is registered. But Codex is trying, but Codex is far behind. There are hundreds of substances that are being used and for which there are national registrations, but there's no Codex MRL. So what do we do in the meantime? And this is really the discussion that needs to happen. And if you consider this to be a priority, that's something that AFRAF can tackle, but AFRAF can tackle also in the context of the fact that Africa is not a monolithic continent. You have various geographies. You have deserts, Saharas, you have tropics, you have a Mediterranean type climate. So because of that diversity, even within Africa, you may require to have import MRLs without mandating the registration of pesticides in every single jurisdiction. So just to open up, and I hope that that made the case for the interest, and we can see how this could be done within AFRAF and with regional economic communities, because I think RECs have a big role to play in this particular context.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and sorry, I took more time on the recruiting there, but with that, thank you so much, actually, Mustafa, for preparing and sharing those insights. We're going to close the session with, in fact, the first, how did you call them, Chris? They were evils, or what did you call them? The seven, the sinister seven. So I guess the first of the sinister seven is food fraud, right? That was the first. Got it. So to fight food fraud and assert authenticity, we also need technologies. And that's what Laurent is going to be sharing with us as the end of this session.
Thank you. Just first comment, it's not as technical as the previous one. So genuine presentation. And once again, I thank Chris because as you will see, we'll discuss about many things that Chris already explained during his presentation. Okay. So first of all, what means food authenticity and why it matters? This is things you need to really understand. Food authenticity is the fact to be sure that you are producing and selling what you think you are producing and selling without any modification, adulteration. Adulteration can be voluntary for economical impact or by mistakes. But in both cases, you need to check that. It's important for consumer confidence. Chris presented the tomato case, where just because of an issue in tomato, China loses 75% of the market. This is what happens when you don't do food authenticity. If a case is discovered, you will lose the confidence and you will lose the market. So it will impact your economy a lot. That's the reason why you need, if you want to achieve the 25% of the food production in several years, like Chris product, you need to really rely on your compound and to be focused on food authenticity. It also has a cultural impact. In France, we had a case some years ago where horse meat was added to beef meat. It was a huge scandal. Could be the same in Africa if we discovered by mistake that some pork meat is imported in without telling it. For cultural, regional, and different and cultural impact, it will be a huge scandal. This is also one reason why you need to check this. And of course, for strategic and sustainable development. If you follow that rules, you will be able to guarantee that whatever food is exported from Africa to our country is of high quality, is really pure, and you will be able to sell it at a higher price. So this is why food authenticity is so important. So it has a global importance because if you want to export globally, you will have to prove that what you are exporting is clean and with food transparency. And food transparency means, again, compliance. You need to put some compliance rules to be sure that you can testify that what you are imported is exactly what you are delivering, and to ensure the authenticity. Some examples that have occurred in the last years in Africa where we have issues with food authenticity. We have a honey case that was adulterated with sugar or syrup. We have some issue with cocoa powder, with milk, with spice, with fish. So as you can see, every type of food commodities can be considered by food authenticity issues. One of the most common issues with food authenticity occurred in China some years ago with the detection of melamine in milk. China was one of the most important exporters of milk. And melanin was added to the milk because melanin is rich in nitrogenous compound, and it gives the impression, the perception that the food is richer in protein. It was pure economical reason to add melamine. It has no other interest than economical reason. But what was not produced by the people who had this melanin is that if you look at this reaction, at the end, it produces cyanuric acid. A lot of babies dies. So food authenticity can also kill people. It's not only to protect you, it's only because it can kill if you don't check the product. What was the impact of that? China completely stopped to import milk in the world. All the countries stopped importing milk from China and, of course, put some regulation and ask for control of melanin. It is a type of case where we have to include a new compound in the existing list of compounds that are followed. This is the type of case that can occur. So it's really, really important. It has economical impact, but it can also kill people if you don't check what you are exporting. Of course, it will have a huge economic impact. If something like that is happening, you will stop the importation. So all the producers of this food will have to find new market. But before finding new market, they will have to prove that there are no more any issue. And you know what is happening? If someone is discovered in one product of Africa, what will happen? People will lose confidence not only on the product, not only on this country, but on Africa exportation. So it will impact the full continent. So it's important, once again, if you want to protect your economy, to be able to develop your economy, that you follow that rules, and you are considering the food authenticity as a very important and strategic part of the analysis of your foodstuff before exportation. So food authenticity, as Samuel said, we will help you by scientific solutions. And as you have seen, food authenticity means many things. And in the same way, you will need many different analytical solutions. For this, we will have to make a collaboration to discuss with you, to understand your needs once again, and then to build some new workflow and new system for food authenticity. Of course, we will then train you on how to use the system, on how to follow the rules, and how to document everything so that you are once again very compliant to export to Europe or other part of the world. Previously, I presented you the pesticide. For pesticide, as I told you, you just need a triple quad, LC or GC triple quad. For food authenticity, as you can see, you can use the full portfolio of system of AGLM. It doesn't mean that for every food commodities, you will have to use the full portfolio. But there are so many different cases that depending on the case, you will have different solutions. You will have to select the right solution depending on what you need, and it will always be a balance between economical impact and the price of the solution, and also when you will apply the solution. And I will very briefly, very quickly present you some kind of type and what type of solution you can apply. As I told you, it will be a choice. It goes between a cost-effective solution and a gold standard solution. Sometimes we need both. One cost-effective solution for quick control at the tolls before exportation on where you import foodstuff, and gold standard for governmental labs that want to check everything and to develop the new regulation. First example, you see this FTER system. It's an infrared system that can detect and analyze what is present in the pack. For example, at tolls, you want to have a control that what is imported is exactly what is written in the package. We just have to click, and in a few minutes, you will know exactly what is in the bag. And also, you will know if it's pure or if it has been contaminated by some other adulterants. It's a very simple solution, cost-effective, for quick control. This solution, still infrared, is a very high-end solution, extremely expensive, but where you can really see in details what is present in the compound. And you will see what is present and you can identify any type of adulteration. But the previous one was something to look, I would say, roughly what is in the bag. You will not see a very set trace of adulterant. With this, you will really be able to see even trace of adulterant. Also, one important part in food authenticity, for example, is the analysis of heavy metals for different reasons. First reason, safety. Of course, if there's arsenic in the foodstuff, it can be lethal, it can kill people. But it's also very important if you want to establish a geographical view of your compound. Because in every crop, if you make some rice in Egypt, in the center of Africa, and South Africa, the soil is different. So the composition of the soil is different. So the mineral you will find in the compound will be different. So by using this type of instrument, you are able to determine if this rice comes from Egypt, South Africa, or in the center of Africa. So it all will help you to establish a kind of geographical identity card of your compounds. Because of course we know that all the rice has not the same price, all the olive oil has not the same price, because of the region where it has been produced, and the quality of the soil, and the quality of the structure, and so on. This will be reflected by this type of instrument. So food authenticity will also help you to differentiate different type of batch of the same type of foodstuff. I told you about the case in France of horse meal that was implemented in beef. This has been detected by this type of instrument. It will analyze DNA. So, for example, if you want to check if a fish that is produced is pure fish, or if it has been adulterated with a low-cost fish to improve the economical cost of the full package, you just have to analyze this type of instrument. And we'll tell you, okay, it's a pure DNA, or there are several different DNA. And with this, you will be able to identify it's not a pure fish. In that case, it's made to develop, to detect pure economical food, adding some low-cost food commodities to higher-cost food commodities. Maybe it has no impact on the safety, but it has impact on the confidence you will give and on to the customers. Pesticides, we had a lot of huge penetration of this type of previously. This is the most important one in food authenticity, food fraud, for safety reasons. So I will not go in detail. This is GC quad and LC quad. But this can be used for any type of targeted analysis. It could be pesticide, it could be solvents, it could be whatever type of targeted analysis. GC and LC quad will help. This is the high end of the instrument. This will be used for very specific cases, mainly in discovery steps. This is made to identify some adulterant. You know that something has been adulterated. You don't know which type of compound it is. You can do structural elucidation with the cutoff. But you can also do what you are seeing is this kind of map. I told you we can map the rice using, for example, the heavy metals. We can do the same with other types of compounds that are present in the rice. What the system will do with the help of the software is it will analyze all the molecules that are present in your samples. All the molecules that are in the rice. The rice contains thousands of molecules. And you will tell the system, this rice is from Egypt, this rice is from Sudan, this rice is from South Africa. And it will look at the difference between these thousands of compounds. It will detect that 10 compounds are characteristics for the rice from Egypt. 20 compounds are characteristics from the rice from South Africa. 5 compounds are characteristics from the rice from Sudan. And anytime you will analyze the rice, it will check these specific compounds. And it will tell you, okay, it's a pure Egyptian rice, or pure South African rice, or it's Egyptian South African rice, but there are compounds that are typical from South Africa. And you will be able to determine what type of compound and where the adulteration comes from. So this is also really interesting for food authenticity. You can do geographical identification of the different foodstuff with this type of methods. For this, you are helped by this type of software. This software, as I told you previously, is part of the workflow. This is a statistical software. I don't know anything on statistical, but I'm able to use it. The software will do the job for you, don't worry. And this is the type of figure you will see. You see this figure on the left with the vertical bar. You have a blue point on the left and orange point on the right. These are the comparison with typical compounds. The blue one means there's something that should be in the sample, but it's less concentrated than it should be. When it's yellow, it means it's higher than it should be. When it's below the line, it means it should be in the sample and I don't find it. So what does that mean? That means that it will indicate to you what types of compounds should not be present, which will help you to understand where the adulteration comes from. Because when you have identified that something is not present, with the instrument you can do structural elucidation, determine what is its compound, and go back to the adulteration to understand, first of all, to prove the adulteration and to understand where it comes from. So this is something really important. And you have a type of software. This is to show you that you can do also structural elucidation. It means that something that is completely unknown, that you can find in any library, with this type of instrument, with some specific experiment, you are also able to discover a new compound and to discover the structure of this compound to add it in your inquiries, for example. So in summary, food authenticity is really crucial. It's crucial for safety. It's crucial to protect your economy. It's crucial to protect your culture, but it needs to be controlled. And for this, you have several types of adulteration that can occur, which means several types of analysis. The instrument choice is always a balance between the economical cost, and your needs. Is it something that you want to see roughly, just a control, or you want to go in deep and understand what has happened to your compound, and to your foodstuff? It is important for internal and external control. Both are critical. And it's critical if you want to continue to export your foodstuff all over the world and to increase your market share. Because without this food authenticity control, you will never be compliant to the European, American, or Asian regulations that are existing. Remember, trust takes time to build, but with only one mistake, you will lose any trust, and it will take a long time to recover this trust. To have this trust, you have to follow the rules. Thank you for your attention.
Merci, Laurent. Thank you again. I know it's past the end of the session time, but if there are any burning questions, I will have a comment actually to close this. I think one of the opportunities that we may have, and I think you've identified it as part of efforts of information sharing. How about a database of methodologies for authenticity that is dedicated to products from Africa, and that would be a repository of reference methods that could be relied on in order to check the authenticity of products in various parts of the continent. I'm going to leave you meditate this idea overnight and hopefully have a great rest. And I will be delighted to meet you again tomorrow at 11 a.m. Thank you so much, everybody, and thank you to all the speakers and contributors. Enjoy Cairo, and we'll see you tomorrow, inshallah. Thank you. All the best.
Africa stands at a pivotal moment. A continent rich in agricultural heritage, dynamic markets, and evolving food systems, now united by a shared ambition to ensure safe, resilient, and innovative food for every African citizen. In 2023, African food regulatory authorities came together in Cairo to make history. The Cairo Declaration established the African Food Regulatory Authorities Forum, AFRAF, a collaborative network to strengthen the continent's food regulatory governance. In December 2025, AFRAF reconvenes, once again in Cairo, on the margins of Food Africa 2025. This second in-person meeting marks a new chapter for food regulatory cooperation across the African continent. Organized by the National Food Safety Authority of Egypt, NFSA, in partnership with the Global Food Regulatory Science Society, G-Force. Over the next 2 days, African food regulators, regional bodies, global partners, and scientific institutions will come together to chart the future of food safety cooperation and innovation in Africa. Day 1 begins with a review of AFRAF's progress since the Cairo Declaration and a focus on enhancing mechanisms of food regulatory cooperation amongst African food regulators. The agenda advances into a critical theme: food monitoring as the foundation of strong food control systems, supporting evidence-based policy aiming for harmonized maximum residue limits and enhanced market access across the continent. On day 2, the spotlight shifts to regulatory modernization and innovation, exploring how Africa can enable new technologies, strengthen resilience, and ready regulatory frameworks. AFRAF members will also discuss practical pathways to build robust national food safety authorities, mobilize resources, and reinforce partnerships with other regions and global partners. This meeting will lead to a roadmap of food regulatory cooperation amongst African food regulators for 2026 to 2027, empowered through AFRAF's leadership. Together, we are shaping a safer, stronger, and more innovative African food system for today and for generations to come.